Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Liz Myska, and today, another guest. Welcome, guest. Could you introduce
yourself? I'm Novick, and I'm a member of the Worcester School Committee.
And I understand today you just were at City Hall taking out your letters. Do
yes.
Tell.
So I'm running for re-election. It would be my sixth Worcester School Committee, and I should know that anyone who's running for office in Worcester over the next 8 weeks or so is going to be elect signatures of large, like I am. You need 300 if you're 100. So the election commission and sort of kicking off the campaign season for the November election. Sure. So at large means that you represent the entire city of Worcester. And so we actually are going through a change, as a number of people may know, in terms of how Worcester elects their school committee. Previously, we have had 6 members of the Worcester School Committee, and then the mayor always serves as the 7th member and chair. All of our school committee currently, right now, is at large. And come November, we're going to be switching to a different format. We're going to have a 9-member school committee, still the mayor is chair. Of the remaining 8, and I need to make sure I hold up the right number of fingers for people who are counting, there will be 6 districts, and there will be 2 at large. And so I'm one of the people who's running for one of those 2 at large seats.
Okay, and the districts coincide with the what do the districts coincide with?
It would be a wonderful universe if they coincided with anything, but they do not. We actually did on the school committee ask the city council to align the council districts with the school committee districts, and we would have had to do it that way because the school committee districts were as a result of a lawsuit. So we were actually, the city council had agreed to a settlement with those who had brought suit under the 14th Amendment in terms of equal representation. So we actually had to have the districts that we had for school committee, and a significant number of us, including the entire Worcester School Committee, said to the City Council, sure, make it a lot easier for voters if they just sort of were the same thing, but they're not. So we will continue to have 5 council districts, and we'll have 6 school committee districts, and they do not align. In large portions of it, if you are in a particular council district, you will also be in a particular school committee district, but then there are places in which obviously that wouldn't be the same.
So what are the 6 districts?
So effectively, they kind of, and I'm still learning this myself, but they kind of go clockwise around the city. So they start, and they have letters rather than numbers, lest to at least alleviate a teeny bit of confusion, right? So it is A, B, C, and so forth, sort of around the outside edge. If you think
of course, it has to be the alphabet, right?
It has to be the alphabet, yes. And it starts kind of in the northeast quadrant of the city with District A, and then sort of goes around the outside edge, meeting back up at the top with a little bit of different kinds of things, because of course what they were looking for was for at least 2 districts that had a majority of traditionally underrepresented communities. So there is this sort of district that kind of comes down from the northeast edge and goes down through the center, and then there's one that's sort of more in the center. And there is a great map for those who are interested. The Research Bureau actually did a really good job in terms of not only where is my district, but also how does it coincide with my city council district, because lots of people want to know that.
Right.
And then also what if you think of yourself as being sort of near particular schools, what schools are in particular districts. But of course, we would say on the school committee that district representation doesn't really align with school attendance either, because kids can, through choice, attend almost any school district in the city of Worcester. Tech draws from all over the city. I mean, there's a lot of different, we push a lot of buses around the city, let's say, and kids go lots of places.
Right. Is there a high school in each district? Or
there is not.
There's not. Okay. I'm just trying to think how.
There really isn't going to be any. Okay. There's not an equal number of elementary schools. Okay. There's not a sort of balance in terms of that. It wasn't. I mean, and they were very honest in creating the districts that it wasn't really done with regard to any of that. It really was simply on the sort of the civil rights grounds in terms of representation of voters, and so that's kind of the entire ground of this case. And then we'll just all need to do the best we can in terms of making sure that we're being thorough in terms of representing the entire city of Worcester, because one of the things about school committees in Massachusetts, written right into our code of ethics, is that once you're on a school committee, you represent all children in your district, regardless of how you were elected to get there. So, we think about this in terms of, say, Wachusett Regional, right? If you are elected from Holden, you still represent the kids from Paxton. The same thing will be true in Worcester. If you're elected from District A, you still represent the kids from District E, and so forth.
I happen to be in Wachusett happens to be my alma mater, so thank you for thank you for that nod in my direction.
They're
now I
understand. People are kind of familiar with exactly. So yeah.
What types of things does a school committee member do?
So I like the way that you asked that question, because there's sort of like, what is our legal sort of responsibility?
Right.
And then there's the kind of, what do you do, right? So this morning, just for example, our bus app, which we're very proud of because we brought transportation in-house this year for the first time. Anyone who is a student or is a family member can have an app on their phone that will tell you where your child's bus is in the morning and the afternoon, and it crashed this morning. So there was a significant amount of my morning that was sort of like letting parents know that we knew, and transportation was working on it and that kind of thing. So there's a bunch of that kind of thing that's being on the school committee, of answering questions and getting people directed where they need to go, and thinking about sort of family concerns and student concerns and faculty concerns and all of those kinds of things in terms of how do we continue to bring those forward in ways that are useful. And then there's kind of the legal responsibilities. So Massachusetts there's a lot of laws around school committees in Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, school committees have 4 main jobs and then sort of an added 5th that's in a different section. We hire, fire, and evaluate the superintendent. So we had a good illustration of that this past year. We brought in Dr. Benares. We are in charge of the budget. So everything having to do with the budget is under our purview. We'll be starting that pretty shortly. We get the proposed budget on May 12th, and then we'll be having 2 budget hearings in June. Before that, though, we actually will we'll have a public hearing and invite the public to speak to us about the budget on May 24th. We also are in charge of all policy for the district. So that's sort of, if you take the laws and you take the regulations, how does it actually apply specifically to the school district? And so we've been looking at, homework policy got a big splash in the news not that long ago in terms of our looking at that. Things like dress code, but it's also pretty basic stuff like, anti-discrimination statements and all of those kinds of things in terms of how does that all work in the school district. And then we also are in charge of goal setting. And so something else that the school committee is currently working on is our strategic plan is sort of aging out. We've hit the end of the last one. And so we're having a conversation really as part of the work that Dr. Benares has done as she's come into the district. She did a lot of listening and learning around the district and brought those back to the school committee. We're taking those, we're looking at the previous strategic plan, and we're sort of saying, okay, so what are the big priorities for the district next in terms of that? And so we're planning on trying to pull as much of that together before the end of the school year so that we'll be heading into next school year with that already set.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And then the 5th one, which lives in a different section of the Massachusetts General Law, is we're also the employer of record for collective bargaining agreements. So unlike on the city side where public employees bargain with the city manager and the city administration, our unions, the teachers union, the custodians, the bus drivers, all of them actually bargain with the school committee.
You said a couple things. I'm curious what the homework. I'm also the dress code. I'm thinking. Yep. Again, I'll let you speak. So
the thing that got lots and lots of press, which kind of made us laugh in the school committee, because what is it that kind of grabs people's attention is always the interesting question, right? So very reasonable thought from my colleague Molly McCullough that we hadn't looked at the homework policy in some time, and it was time to do that again. We should review it, make sure that it aligned with what we thought were priorities, with what we knew was common practice, that what we knew was best practice, what was working for families, and in the item that she put on the agenda, she mentioned that a number of districts have started to put on their school calendar particular days for no homework. So you're heading into a long weekend, or we know that a lot of families are going to be celebrating a holiday, or really we just want to make sure that there's at least one time during, the fall season where there aren't 47 different things that are crunching on top of whatever else the family is doing. And this is not uncommon. There's a number of districts, even in Massachusetts, that have already done it. They might do once a quarter, that kind of thing. Well, the first thing that happened is that some people got a hold of it and said that we were banning all homework, which will get you lots of press, but was not actually what anybody was talking about. And then the headline inevitably was the Worcester School Committee bans all homework, as if we had somehow already done this. But the very reasonable conversations that we did actually manage to have was sort of starting to have, and this will go in subcommittee, there's going to be a conversation about, with teachers, with parents, with students about sort of what is homework practice, how's it working, that kind of thing. is, things like what is homework for? What do we know about homework? What is homework good for? Was it not good for? And those kinds of conversations as we sort of say, well, what should it look like in elementary school and in middle school and high school? What should it look potentially like for different kinds of classes? And then also, yes, things like, are there days where we shouldn't be assigning homework? Are there particular kinds of expectations we shouldn't have? And I mean, part of that too is that I think, partly because I think Worcester is very neighborhood-based, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that we're also we're a big system, right? We have about 24,000 students, we have 50 schools. And part of what we're trying to do is bring a little bit of consistency such that if you're a third grader over here and you're a third grader over there, you shouldn't be having wildly different kinds of levels of homework, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing is that, a lot of our students don't go home to that sort of, whatever image of you're going to sit at the kitchen table and mom's going to be bustling in the background doing, and someone's going to be able to talk to you about your math if you're struggling.
Right.
That's actually really rare, right? Regardless of whether you're going to like the Boys and Girls Club after school or we certainly had years where my kids were jumping in the back of the car because we had to drive somebody to soccer practice and somebody to this, and like nobody was sitting and sort of helping you with your whatever. And I think that that's important too, because you could end up with a real inequity in terms of the level of support kids have at home. And then depending on what you're having them do for homework, you end up with sort of building in this sort of academic inequity, even though no one's intending it. Like the kids, all get the same work, but then they go back, like when they leave the building, they're going to wildly different kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, you're making me think that again, some kids would come up with excuses. Well, I go to my grandmother's and,
Sure.
And the dog ate my homework or they don't speak English or...
There's plenty of that, certainly. I mean, and honestly, I will say that in my family, one of the things that brought the kind of whose job is homework anyway question home to me is that our youngest child has been in the dual language program here in Worcester since they were in kindergarten, now a high school junior. And once you get to, say, like third or fourth grade and the word problems start coming home in Spanish and mom and dad don't speak Spanish, you get a very different insight into what homework can look like for a lot of families in the city of Worcester. It's not just that you're asking, whether or not I could actually do the math. I don't have the language to be able to assist you with what you're doing. And so then you start to get into like, well, how much help should you really be getting at home? And how much of this really is your work and only your work?
Right. And what is being taught almost.
Sure.
So that has piqued my curiosity about special needs.
Yes.
Because currently I'm assisting someone who is totally blind. He's an adult, but he grew up in another country, so he's learning English.
Yep.
And he's at the college level. And let's just say it has been torturous for him and for the agencies that are assisting him, for his colleagues who are trying to assist him, like butting heads with the school administration too, because they have a repertoire. This is that they're trying to place him in.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that this becomes because of the language barrier, but also because of in his case, the special need because of the blindness.
Yeah.
So what is the approach? Has the approach changed under the new superintendent? Is it the same? Are these, because I'm also thinking, I'm sorry, this is a multi-level question. With COVID, I know that children with disabilities in particular suffered because they didn't have the presence of the support system that many school environments offered.
Yep.
So
I mean, one of the things that we've seen with Dr. Monera is on a couple of different in a couple of different spaces is the idea of sort of like, okay, so new administration, it's time to take stock. Like, where are we at? And one of them has actually been the special education department of sort of, what is our process? How is it working? Right now, actually, the SPED PAC, which is the parents of students with special needs group, which is required by Massachusetts general law and actually is run by parents, currently has a survey out and is in our multi-languages and is really asking families to weigh in terms of how is everything working, how has everything worked, what hasn't worked, in terms of those kinds of experiences. And in some ways, it's actually really timely because the state has actually just come out with a new individual education plan, sort of not just document, but also really process. And one advantage we have there is that the department's, it was the assistant commissioner, Russell Johnston himself is actually a parent of a special needs student, and so sort of experiences this in both ways. And part of what they've been working hard on at the department level is the notion of this is, first of all, supposed to be accessible to families. It's supposed to be something that is a partnership. And secondly, that the voice of the student is actually supposed to be heard starting from, I think, really maybe earlier than school districts necessarily have always incorporated them. And so those two things together, we've actually piloted the new IEP here in Worcester over at Roosevelt, and I know that the department was gathering feedback from the schools that were actually doing that, but I also know that Worcester is intentionally sort of learning from that too in terms of putting those things together. So we're kind of in this maybe asking the question phase rather than necessarily having the plans and solution phases. We're doing that on a number of grounds. We're doing that with the security audit. We're doing that with our multilingual learner department, which similarly in terms of what you're talking about of family accessibility and how well are we actually meeting the needs of both students and families. Is this another case where we do a really good job of kind of being the experts in the room but don't actually really make it a partnership? There's another sort of process going there in terms of reviewing what do we do well, what are we not doing well, how can we do better, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, you're making me think also when you evoked that image of coming home from school and being at the kitchen table. Schools aren't like
no, they're not.
There's so much going on.
Yes,
and is it a safe place? Number one, is it a safe place? And I guess it depends upon the person you're asking that question, because I would think even now, faculty, staff, the children, because of all of the school shootings, would be saying, no, it's not a safe place,
Well, and also, what does safety mean, right? Yeah. So I think a lot about, because school shootings get the headlines and they're awful and horrific and all of that kind of thing. I think we think a lot about school safety in terms of that kind of thing. And so whether you're talking about gun control or whether you're talking about the kinds of I think of it as security theater, but whether it's cameras or buzzers or the thousands of dollars of nonsense they're forever trying to sell me through my email. The thing where they had there was a school in, I can't remember, it was in Arkansas, where you could pull out a safe room from the wall, and then I started comparing how much that cost to how much the average teacher's salary was in Arkansas. Fantastic. But also,
somebody's trying to sell it. This is capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. But also, to your point, is it safe to be you at school, right? So
right.
Whether you're a student who speaks a different language at home, whether you're, I'm thinking of all of the ways in which students who are trans, students who are LGBTQ are just sort of under assault effectively by different legislatures across the country, whether you're a student with different kinds of learning needs, is your school a place where it is okay and safe to be that, and you're actually supported for that? And that's also something we've been working on, because we both from the pandemic, there certainly was a mental health crisis to some degree even before that.
Yes.
What we saw, with the level of death and illness, the removal from school supports, that has become elevated. But then there's also just so much that's going on, whether it's sort of the school shootings or whether it's the kinds of things that are happening in different legislatures across the country, where our students have grounds for not feeling safe. And how do we make sure that we're doing everything we can as adults to first make sure we're creating learning environments where they feel safe to be them, but also get the supports they need, whether it's for mental health or whether it's just for being able to learn, or whether it's just for being able to be comfortable being themselves.
I'm also thinking curriculum, excuse me, as well, that I remember when I was at Wachusett, I loved the English class, with we did Shakespeare, and there was a stage, and you got to experiment with different kinds of repertoires, I guess, and being exposed to poetry, or being exposed to good literature. And now I'm thinking again, there's an assault on books, and and censorship, like, oh, you can't read that, or that's not. So there just seems so much to navigate, as you're talking. There's so much to navigate, so much to think about, and it's not just learning that your 3 R's, which that also, my husband was a teacher for a short stint at South High, and I remember him, this is back in the 90s, so these were, and he was in the business curriculum, so but he was also certified to teach social studies. Anyway, I remember him bringing home quote-unquote papers, which consisted of a paragraph that was not even a sentence. I mean, I was just, yikes. How are people going to communicate, in the future? And I guess now that we have more computer and more, artificial intelligence, people don't necessarily have to communicate that way, but it just, what a loss of the written word, of the spoken word, when it's done for you instead of done by you. Learning that love of literature, learning how wonderful it is to be in a library. What kind of emotions that evokes. The other thing is that you're making me think about it, because this is, when we're taping this, is Easter season. I remember my husband saying that he had a student that said, well, what is Easter anyway? And had no idea, literally no concept of, what it was. And I'm just thinking, wow, again, the disparities in what is taught and what you're exposed to, and how that follows you throughout a lifetime, unless you decide, no, I want to, I want to open my mind, because that's what I think about education. Education teaches tolerance to different viewpoints. So the more that you're aware of all that's about us, you become like, there's no way I could possibly know all of this. Sure. So again, I bit off a big chunk there, and now I'm.
And one thing that I've actually really appreciated. I mean, you will often see people in Worcester or hear sort of elected officials and that kind of thing, cite some sort of number of, we have some number, 94 languages spoken in the Worcester Public Schools. Some, it's always impossibly high. From my perspective, one of the things I'm always conscious of is the fact that about 2/3 of our students speak a first language other than English at home, which means that if you speak English at home, you're actually in the minority in the Worcester Public Schools. And that is, I think, a very different way of thinking about what that then means for everything else that we do. That then has all kinds of other implications, right? So, I mean, I'm laughing a little bit to myself because we did this sort of juggle in terms of trying to schedule our school committee meetings this month, avoiding everybody's holidays in April and also staying away from it. And we failed, by the way. We're actually meeting on Greek Orthodox Holy Thursday still. But between Passover and the Eastern Church and the Western Church and actually having Patriots Day in the middle and having a school vacation week, you were going to run into something. But then I'm also thinking of the ways in which the schools are working to try to make sure that students' needs are met even in that way. So our Muslim students are observing Ramadan right now, which means that they're fasting from dawn until dark, which means that they're not eating while they're at school, even having water. Well, if you have a regular sort of school day, that means that someone at some point is going to try to require you to go into the cafeteria and you can't eat. Making provision for those students who are observing their fast to have some other place to go has been something that our high schools have been doing and our middle schools have been doing, which to me is just another one of those, like, how do you make sure that you see who your students actually are and make sure that their needs are met so that they can continue to get through the day. And that, I think, is something that the administration and the school committee are sort of much more actively thinking about, and sort of, when we're doing things like looking at our policies, so like dress code, right? Obviously, some of the things we had to look at is there's a very long tradition in American education of you can't possibly have anything on your head in school. Okay, well, we have people who that's required for religiously. We have people who culturally may actually be having things on their heads for other kinds of reasons besides religion. How do you make sure that you're making that provision so that it doesn't become a thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you should just be able to kind of walk into your classroom and sit down and be, dressed in a way that's comfortable to you. That isn't going to become some sort of a tussle or battle of wills with the administration or with your teacher.
Well, I was thinking of head coverings, but I was also thinking of, again, back in my day, which I will not reveal when the back of my day was, but you had to, you couldn't look unkempt, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the policies that came down, and nothing too short, nothing too revealing, nothing too, inappropriate. And I'm just wondering if it seems like the tide has turned in a different way.
Yes. No, and so in a couple of ways. I mean, first of all, one of the things that we see, there's giant reams of studies on this, is that dress codes are one of the places where we see implicit bias, right? So you can have one girl and another girl both wearing the same outfit, and if there's a difference in race or ethnicity, you very often will see a difference in terms of consequence. But the other thing I will say, and this is one where representation matters, is we have a majority female school committee right now, and every single one of us, I am sure, has a story of being dress coded in some way. And so like that, once you start getting enough people into positions of authority, and I think this is the first time the Worcester School Committee has had a majority female makeup, which is unusual. Women generally are the majority on school committees. It makes a huge difference. Like, you don't need to tell me what it's like to have someone have you stand up and see if your thumbs are as long as your skirt. Yes, I've actually done that, right? Yes. And I know that how debilitating that is in terms of you just were trying to learn algebra and suddenly this became the story.
Right. Exactly.
And that's really important. It's really important to make sure that we've got all of those kinds of perspectives making those decisions at the table.
Tracy, we are out of time.
Not that fast.
I know, really. But the bell didn't ring.
We'll believe it anyway.
I again, this has been fascinating. I really, really appreciate it. Please come back, during the campaigns, so that we can talk about safe routes to school. I really want to talk about safe routes to school.
We should talk about safe routes to school. That's very important. Yes. Yep.
But I really appreciate it. And again, just give yourself a plug. And she needs signatures. And,
right, 300 signatures. Come find me. Look for me on Facebook, or look for me on Instagram, or look for me on Twitter. I'll be bopping around the city, actually posting some places that I'm even going to be this week, so they can collect signatures. But also, if you want to help collect signatures, I'm taking names for that too.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
I'm glad to. Thanks very much.
Join me for another edition of Connecting the Dots.
Please note that the information provided in this show is not a substitute for consulting with an experienced local attorney and receiving counsel based on the facts and circumstances of a particular transaction. To contact Lizbeth, email her at lizbeth@elizabethlmyska.com or call her office at 508-753-7681. We're online at connectingthedots.lawyer. Executive producers, Liz Myska and Jack Peacock. Producers, John Medberry and Bill Hamilton. A production of Elizabeth L. Myska, JD, LLM, in association with Compliments.